Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We are presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, we've got good friend of the program, Michael Pina, on from over at Vice Sports. Michael, I think, has honestly done as good a job covering the NBA as anyone in the league this year. His Outlet Pass column every single week on Vice is seriously my favorite thing to read. It's right up there with Zach Lowe. It's right up there with anything that, the people you kind of identify as the elite of the elite from basketball media, put out there. And I think that Mike is seriously joining that rapidly. So with that, great introduction, Pina. How's it going?
It's it's going wonderful. I want all the listeners to know I did not pay you to say what you just did, but that was very nice of you to say, and I really much appreciate it.
Yeah. So Pina has done a great job doing that, but ultimately, he kind of came up covering the Celtics. Would you say that's fair?
Well, yeah, I grew up in Boston, a Celtics fan, and then last year I had the pleasure of kind of covering that team very closely for the Isaiah Thomas season. So yeah, that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, and I know that I talk about the Celtics a lot on this podcast, but it's because they're one of the most interesting teams in the league, and obviously last night's Cavaliers-Celtics game kind of gives us a really interesting avenue into talking about the two top teams in the Eastern Conference right now. So we're going to start with those two, and then we're going to go into the race for the bottom, basically. There are, I think, 8 teams between 27 and 25 losses, 10 teams within 3 wins of each other at the bottom. So I just kind of want to talk to Mike about what these NBA teams should be prioritizing going forward. But before we get there, let's talk about Cavs-Celtics. What did you take away from that game last night, first and foremost?
I mean, it's tough to take away one thing from just a regular season game in which, the Cavaliers were on a back-to-back, which was said about half a dozen times by Brad Stevens before and after the game, in Brad Stevens fashion, tempering expectations. And then, Kevin Love suffered I don't know if it was officially a sprained ankle, but he twisted his ankle kind of early in that game. And, even before he heard it, he was just very aggressive. He usually owns Al Horford and whenever the Celtics play the Cavs. And he wasn't, he wasn't finishing his shots, but he was very aggressive with a high usage before that injury. And then, they had to close with Tristan Thompson on the floor instead of Love. So, those things obviously matter within the context of just a single game sample size. But, anytime you beat the Cavaliers and LeBron James is on the floor and you're up 20 points in the second half and you hold on to that lead, it's good.
So I feel like I've seen a few people kind of put out there after this game, when do we start believing in the Celtics? When is too early to start believing the Celtics can actually do this? I think that, we're at the point now where we should really believe that the Celtics can win the Eastern Conference. I do understand that LeBron James is on the other side of this argument, and I never want to bet against LeBron James. If you were making me pick one of the teams to win the East, I still think I would pick the Cavs. But I think it's more of if I had to just narrow it down to those two teams, not even putting percentages on anyone else, I would think it's more of a 55-45 split to me right now, who I think is going to come through the East out of those two teams. Where are you at on that kind of debate before we kind of jump into the rest of it?
I'm a lot lower on Boston's chances to beat the Cavs than you, I think. It's first of all, it's kind of a very simple. My argument is very simple. It's basically LeBron James. If you just watch,
sure, that's fair.
Watch him. If you watch him last night, it's they just don't have an answer. They tried Jaylen Brown at the start, and Jaylen he's a pretty good defender. He's strong. He's long. He's intuitive. But whenever LeBron James drives at him, it's he curls up into a fetal position and it's a layup or a dunk just about every single time. He doesn't even foul him. So that's a tough matchup for the Celtics. They threw Marcus Morris out on him last night. That was abysmal.
Well,
Semi Ojeleye actually had it.
That's who I was going to say. They threw Ojeleye on him, and it was pretty okay, I thought, he didn't look like a rookie guarding LeBron, I think is the best way to put it, right?
No, he was strong, which you need to be. They went at him from the post, which, I think if they were to come at it again, it would probably be in a different situation. They would attack him differently just because Semi is so ridiculously strong and stout. But yeah, that's an option. But I just, at the end of the day, it's like they have LeBron, they have these great shooters. I'm very high on what Isaiah Thomas will bring to this team. I am a huge Isaiah believer. I thought he looked really good. He didn't really have the burst that he had last year, understandably, in his debut. But just, Portland was dropping back on those high screens and he was pulling up and he hit like 3 or 4. So he's still got that in his bag, and that really opens up things for everybody else. So, I mean, the fact that they're as good as they are without Isaiah and without a real secondary scoring option, no offense to Kevin Love, it's kind of remarkable.
Well, the secondary perimeter option, you know what I mean? Like, Kevin Love still, I think the best way to utilize him when the ball is in his hands is to give him high post options or to put him in the low post and let him create either via the pass or via the shot, right? Because he's actually been really, really good in post-up situations this year statistically. But you do need that secondary ball handler. That's the thing that LeBron James has been craving. Even in the past when he had Kyrie Irving, he wanted another like backup point guard when, it seemed kind of crazy that the Cavs should prioritize backup point guard, but it was something that he always wanted on the floor with him, and it's really difficult for this Cavs team to do that whenever Isaiah Thomas isn't playing. Let's just kind of transition into that because I wanted to talk about Isaiah Thomas's debut against Portland. He goes for, I want to say 17 points in like 19 minutes or something like that. Relatively efficient. I think he had like 14 shooting possessions and, didn't have the burst, but he was knocking down shots. The key for Isaiah, I think, is going to be how does he absorb contact, and is he still willing to fearlessly drive into the lane and get to the foul line consistently? Didn't do that a ton against Portland, but I'm not going to say that he's not going to do that in the future. What were your impressions beyond just thinking that he looked pretty good outside of the burst against Portland?
Well, he fell over twice by my count, and that was good to see. I mean, it's like you want to see him. He did attack. I think he drove on Shabazz Napier, turned the corner on him, and kind of finished an and one where he fell over, landed on his hip. That I think everyone in the Cavaliers organization caused everybody to exhale a little bit, and I know for him personally, he probably was relieved to get that out of the way. But I mean, I've always been a believer in his defense of all things. I know that sounds absolutely insane, and there are obviously some parts of his his physical makeup that prevent him from being elite on that end. But he follows the script, and that's very important up high. He knows the pick and roll coverages. Against Portland, he kind of screwed up a few times, let Damian Lillard get off with a couple pull-ups going to his right. So you clean those up a little bit, and he's kind of, he's not a stopper on the defensive end, but I think a little bit of the warts that people attribute to him on that end are a little unfair. So I think that
one thing that's worth pointing out there too is that Washington, he was like, I don't remember if he was all league defense, all Pac-12 or 10. I can't remember what it was then. Or if he was all league defense in the Pac whatever. But he was known as like a pretty stout defender who used his strength.
He's feisty.
To, actually, kind of knock guys off at the point of attack.
He's feisty. I mean, he's not Kyle Lowry, but he's just a feisty dude. And for how high his usage was last year, I actually thought his effort on the defensive end deserved commendation, and it didn't really get it just because of the on-off numbers and real plus minus and whatnot. But so I think he'll be
smart defending for you in some lineups off the bench. Whenever you have Terry Rozier, who is equally as feisty, but also 4 inches taller and 5 inches longer, it's just not going to look good for you in terms of on-off numbers.
For sure, definitely. And that same thing applies to Avery Bradley, whose on-off numbers were never great with the Celtics, even though he's one of the better on-ball defenders in basketball. But yeah, I mean, just, what's really interesting to me is I looked it up. LeBron James' minutes were the lowest they've been since about Thanksgiving in that Portland game. I think he played 32 or 32 and a half, maybe 33. Dwayne Wade's minutes were the lowest that he's played since Veterans Day, which I don't know if he's going to ultimately be happy about that. But, the benefit of having someone like Isaiah on your team is, you get to lessen. I know usage is probably more of a marker of the toll that these guys are taking, but these guys are old. They have been in the league for 15 years, and having Isaiah on the floor kind of gives you a little bit of a buffer with their playing time and allows a little bit more flexibility from Ty Lue's standpoint. So I think that is a factor as well. But yeah, just having Isaiah, being the offensive, if he's 90% of what he was last year, which I think he can be. I don't know if that's popular thought, but if he's that, then this team will waltz into the Eastern Conference Finals.
So I guess
I should say the NBA Finals, not the Eastern Conference Finals.
Well, I don't think they'll waltz into the NBA Finals, even if he's 90%, to be honest. And here's where I'll give you kind of my case. Are you a little bit worried about the way that Isaiah will affect Kevin Love? Because Kevin Love, over the last, I would say, 25 games before last night, had been really, really good this year. He kind of embraced becoming that true second option, and they were using him more in the areas that, as I mentioned earlier, I think he succeeds in. He's really, really good whenever the Cavs allow him to kind of clog the lane and clog the mid-post and do some interesting things there. Whenever Isaiah was on the floor against Portland, it did seem like he kind of, Kevin Love this is, took a bit of a step back into the more traditional role that he kind of occupied whenever Kyrie Irving was there. And I'm worried that whenever, if that's going to be the case, if they can't figure out a way to optimize Kevin Love, that if you have a less than 100% Isaiah Thomas, you have a less than 100% Kevin Love, you have an older team that is worse defensively last year than what I think the Cavs were last year. I don't, and you have a Celtics team that's better than they were last year, very clearly. I don't know that all of these pieces can come together, in the same manner that they did last year. I think that it's possible, but I'm just a little bit worried, based on some of the things we saw.
Yeah, those are fair. I think that a lot of it will smooth itself out. And again, it's the ultimate scapegoat, but it's just like LeBron James is on the team and everything will be fine. But right. I don't know. I think if you use Love in pick and pop situations with Isaiah, he's so difficult when he is at full strength at corralling high. He's so good at turning the corner, splitting screens. He's just like he's such a slippery ball handler. And I think if you have a 3-point presence like Love to occupy that screener, in the same way that the Celtics were able to take advantage of the Chicago Bulls in the playoffs last year when they had Al Horford at the 5, I think those lineups could have a lot of offensive success. And even when Love was, I do agree with you that Love has been playing phenomenal basketball, probably his best since he was traded to the Cavaliers. But yeah. When he is in a slightly more reserved role, as a team, Cleveland's offense is been historically great when he's more of just a spot up option. So it's not, it's okay for him to just take a slight step back for the good of the team.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Another kind of worry from me that we just don't know yet is that Portland's guards tend to be pretty small. The guys that they threw on Isaiah Thomas in that game, either don't have incredible foot speed or incredible length. Like you mentioned him turning the corner against Shabazz Napier. Shabazz Napier is 5'11" with relatively short arms. He was playing against Damian Lillard on occasion in that game. I want to see him against bigger, longer defenders and see if he can still turn the corner. I think that that's going to be the key marker for him coming back into this Cavs team.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's kind of been, that's what teams would throw on him last year. I remember Robert Covington had particular success against Isaiah. But, when you spread the floor with him, he's still just so devastating because his pull-up game is on point. He's so good at drawing fouls. He's so explosive in the paint. So if all those things come back, I don't know if length will be able to deter him that much. Right. And I don't really think I saw it in the Portland game, but just thinking out loud, like when you use LeBron as a screener with Isaiah, that's going to be a devastating combination. Especially with LeBron,
the way he's shooting this year, it's going to be unstoppable. I think, to be honest. But I'm just thinking out loud in terms of, okay, what do the Cavs do if Isaiah doesn't come back at the same level that he was at last year? We'll see if that happens. The other big concern I want to talk to you about with Cleveland before we move on to Boston is, how much does their wing situation worry you right now? Because J.R. Smith, we're midway through the year and he has not turned this thing around at all. He was, I would say, probably their worst player on the floor last night. He was really, really bad. Do they need to go out? Like, it doesn't seem like they have enough faith, in Iman Shumpert when he's healthy to just throw him out there. I haven't seen enough from Jeff Green to really think that he's going to be a great option. Kyle Korver is aging. Obviously, he brings his own defensive deficiencies where you can't play him in certain lineups, I would say. Do they need to go out and grab a wing on the trade deadline and try and bolster their unit there?
They may. I think they thought that Jae Crowder would be a lot better than he's been. He's struggled to fit in, and he hasn't really shot the ball well this season. If they didn't have Kyle Korver, Lord knows where they would be, to be honest.
It's crazy. I mean, he's been really good.
But yeah, he's 36 years old, and just last night he basically brought them back into the game a little bit in the second half. So, I mean, I'm a proponent, honestly, of trading the Brooklyn pick, and I know this kind of leads into a discussion that we're going to have in a little bit later on, but I don't think that pick is going to be top 5. And what are you doing if you're holding on to it? You get let's say, the 7th or 8th pick. LeBron leaves. It's like, that's really not going to put you in a great position moving forward relative to moving it now, trying to get a wing, and competing for a championship here with one of the best players of all time. So there's risk either way. If I was Cleveland, I would be aggressively shopping it. And, these opportunities to actually win a championship are so few and far between, and I would be milking it for as much as I could.
Yeah, I mean, the question there is, if you think the Brooklyn pick falls between 5 and 8, I'm not particularly convinced of that for what it's worth, but we'll talk about that later. If you think that pick is going to fall between 5 and 8, I don't really have a problem trading it, especially given the fact that, as you said, these chances are so few and far between to win titles. My question is, I don't know who you go out and grab that fits within this, within this offense, because you do need another spacer on the wing, and I would prefer it, if I'm trading this pick, to be someone that has a relative amount of team control going forward, hopefully on the last year or maybe the second to last year of a rookie deal. I don't really know who's out there. I mean, you would probably argue that you want a veteran in this case, right?
No, I mean, not necessarily. I have 2 guys off the top of my head, and they are more younger. I think if you were Kobe Altman, what you would want to do is actually, I wouldn't trade it for a veteran who's, in his older than 25 years old, to be honest, or even older than that. I think there's a couple guys younger who maybe are entering restricted free agency this summer who could move the needle a little bit for you, but I'm not sure that the value there makes a lot of sense, and it would take balls to pull the trigger on moving the Nets pick for, one of the names I have in my head is Rodney Hood, someone who, injury concerns aside, I think could really help you out as a spacer, as someone who can create their own shot, who can run a pick and roll, who can guard multiple positions, if healthy. So that's someone who I think the Utah Jazz would move on from pretty quickly, given Donovan Mitchell's ascendance.
Well, in that case too, you know what you could do with Utah then, if we're just fake trading here, you could probably pry Derek Favors from them too.
Yeah, I mean, I love Derek Favors so much, and and I it's a whole tricky thing with them with Favors and Gobert, because I actually am probably the only person in the world who would rather have Favors than pay Gobert a max deal, but actually that might probably be going too far, but I love Favors at the end of the day, and I don't know. I feel like they can get something else for Favors in a separate deal, but yeah, that would be an interesting situation for sure.
But if I'm trying to like kind of map this out in my brain, like could you deal Iman Shumpert, Cedi Osman, and Ante Zizic and the Brooklyn pick for those two?
I don't know if that's enough salary. Usually when I've been tinkering with the like Tristan Thompson is the guy who if I were the Cavaliers and I was moving the Brooklyn pick, I would also be trying to get off some salary, because I'm not going to be in the luxury tax if LeBron leaves. That's just not an option. So I would attach it to Tristan Thompson if I could. But yeah, it's a tricky situation. You know, the other guy who I would be calling with this pick is Aaron Gordon, and you know, I don't know if the Orlando Magic would be willing to do that. I mean, I know that the guys in charge there right now did not draft Gordon, and I mean, his market value could be a little stunted given who has cap space and who doesn't this summer, but I don't know. I don't know if that's a franchise guy, and I don't know how much they love him there. And I wrote a little bit about him today. I'm not really sold on his development. I like, you know, the 3-point shooting is phenomenal, and I think he's a potential all defensive team member. But he just tries to do too much too often. And I think in a more structured environment in Cleveland, where there's really not a lot of pressure on him to create for himself, he can just attack closeouts, hit spot-up shots, cut. I mean, that would be a pretty devastating addition that, I mean, could potentially make the Cavaliers favorites to win it all.
So here's going to be my case for you on Aaron Gordon.
Okay.
So he's averaging 19 a game. Let's say he's like in a better team, he averages 15 a game. So 15 a game, 7 rebounds, potential all-defense member, hitting 38%. He's hitting 40% right now. Let's say he's hitting 38% from 3. That's probably a top 50, top 40 player in the league, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
especially at 22 years old.
Yeah, that's a really, really good piece, I think. Like, if I'm Orlando, I probably don't trade him for pick number. Like, if I think that I don't trade him for the Brooklyn pick, I would say. Like, I would not trade him straight up for pick number 5 in this draft, I don't think.
Yeah, I think you're also coming at it from the standpoint of knowing, who are the players in this draft. They are all ghosts to me. I know nothing about any of them except that Mo Bamba is really long and I like him.
Well, honestly, I think if you were going to do it in any draft, it would be this draft. Like, this draft goes 7 or 8 deep, where you should feel pretty good about it in terms of the guy you're getting. Like, if you get Colin Sexton at 8, you should feel really good if you're Orlando, right? You could theoretically build around, if you traded Aaron Gordon and got pick 7 with this Brooklyn pick, you could build around Colin Sexton and Mohamed Bamba or something like that with their other pick. That's a really good combination. That would be really fun. But I can't tell you for sure either of those guys is going to be as good as Aaron Gordon.
Yeah, that's the risk. But if I'm just looking at it from the perspective of their new management, and I would want to start from the ground up. If I would want, I again do not know how much money Aaron Gordon is going to make on his next deal, but who knows who's going to throw an offer sheet? Like, what if Philly throws a humongous offer sheet out there because they have max cap space and swing and miss everywhere else? Like, who knows?
God, I love that
idea. That's very scary. But so who knows how much he's going to cost? And if I'm Orlando and I'm finally bottoming out, which it appears that they're doing, I would not really mind too much giving up on him, even though I love him.
We'll talk about that in a minute. Before I move on, we're going to transition from the Cavaliers to the Celtics here, but I think this is a guy that could help us do that. You mentioned earlier that Jae Crowder has just flat out not been as good as what I think Cleveland anticipated, and certainly as I anticipated. What do you think what do you think the ills are for Jae Crowder right now?
Well, the first thing you look at with a guy like that who, can't really dribble, isn't a creative playmaker, isn't a terrific passer, is the three-point percentage. And it's pretty cut and dry in evaluating him that he's not having a good year because he's shooting 31% from beyond the arc. On the defensive end, you want him to, defend fours, but also be able to switch out on ones and twos. And, his lateral quickness over the past couple years since he signed that great contract with the Celtics has really waned, mostly thanks to a few serious ankle injuries. He just isn't, I don't want to say he's bad, but I mean, if he's average or even slightly above average on the perimeter, that's probably not going to cut it, through a playoff run. And he's strong, and that's wonderful. But again, he's just such a limited basketball player creatively, and doesn't, if he's not spacing the floor, there's really no reason to have him out there. So his minutes have kind of been dwindling as the year's gone on, and obviously he suffered a terrific tragedy in the offseason that kind of prevented him from being in tip-top shape coming into the season, and he could round out into form. But I mean, even last year was the best three-point shooting year of his career, and before that there was kind of little evidence that he's this sharpshooter. So yeah. I would be worried if I was the Cavaliers.
Let's talk about the Celtics here. The Celtics I would say, they've played 41 games now. From games 20 to 30, they started to really struggle defensively. But it seems like they've kind of turned that back on. Over the course of the last 10 games, they're at a 99.6 defensive rating. Over the last 5, 98.0. Do you think that it's just kind of attributable to, you get into these lulls during the season where it's tough and then you have to kind of figure some things out. Teams adjust after 20 games and you have to figure other things out. And it's also worth mentioning, they haven't played awesome, over the course of, game 25 to 35. They've won, I think, 4 of their last 5. But, what is your overall impression of Boston's defense at this stage?
I mean, from the beginning of the year through the first couple of weeks when, they were a mountain ahead of everybody else in defensive rating, I kind of thought it was a bit of a mirage. The loss of Crowder, the loss of Bradley, that's damaging. But I thought that the addition of length with Tatum and Jalen at those positions in the starting lineup, I thought Aaron Baines is a player that they didn't have last year, a big presence on the inside who, really... He's probably the best verticality presence that they've had since Brad Stevens was hired. Yeah. So that's a different aspect.
He's helped them rebound the ball too. That was a big issue for them last year. Their defensive rebounding rate is 78.4 this year. That's a really, really good number for them.
Yeah, rebounding is huge, and that is, again, when you just look at the length. I mean, I thought that they didn't even need another 5 after they signed Gordon Hayward and drafted Tatum, and just the length that they would have on the perimeter is just it's like night and day from what they had last year with Isaiah and Bradley, and yeah. Crowder's wingspan isn't anything impressive. So that's obviously huge. And then
another thing that length does, before kind of moving on to the next thing you were going to say, that length it really helps them mitigate issues at the point guard spot, right at the point of attack. It allows you to kind of dig down just that extra half step inside whenever your point guard gets beaten and still be able to recover out to a 3-point shooter. Just those little small inches that, people think, are you making too much of wingspan whenever a player is in the NBA draft? Are you making too much of just being big? These are the situations where it kind of really, really helps you. You can afford to play a Kyrie Irving, who I would say is ostensibly less feisty than Isaiah Thomas. He probably gets lost a little bit more than Isaiah. But
no question.
Yeah,
no question.
But at the same time, he's just kind of bigger and longer than Isaiah, and that kind of helps him in a way it hinders Isaiah. Neither of them are great defenders, though, but where Boston's length comes in is that it mitigates the issue once that first level gets beaten defensively.
Right, your margin for error is a lot lower, or a lot higher, I should say. I don't know which, but you know what I'm trying to say. But yeah, and then it's just like it also goes back to coaching and the philosophy that Brad Stevens has instilled, where you want to run guys off the 3-point line, you want to shrink the floor. They do a really good job of that, and they use their length and they use their intuition. Jason Tatum is a much smarter defensive player than I expected him to be, and he seems to literally improve on both ends every week, which is kind of remarkable. But
my sneaky hot take is that Duke cannot teach defense.
I don't think I've watched a Duke basketball game in like 7 years, so I'm gonna just nod my head in my bedroom. But
if you look back at like Duke's adjusted defensive ratings according to KenPom, 79th, 47th, 86th. They had the year where they won the national title that they were 11th, but if people remember, they were really bad defensively up until like February that year. Then 86th, 26th, 79th, going back to 2012. I think Coach K's kind of stopped coaching defense a little bit.
Well, when you just recruit the very best players every year,
right?
It's what's defense doesn't really matter.
Doesn't matter. Anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if this team has the best defense in the NBA, and if that will carry on. I think they're right now. Cleaning Glass still has them at number 1 in defensive rating. I don't know if that's going to keep up throughout the season. I do think that the schedule has hurt them a little bit. I mean, if you just watched, for example, the last Thursday when they came back to beat the Houston Rockets, like early in that game, Al Horford, who I think is has been one of the 5 best defenders in the league, was just like not moving. And he had his arms up because he always has his arms up, but those feet were not moving. He was not bending over for 50-50 balls. He was not bending over to take away pocket passes. It was a man in need of vacation badly. So that sort of thing matters. Even if you want to be in the right spot, sometimes your body just won't go there. And as you mentioned earlier, the dog days of the season are here, and I think the Celtics have suffered particularly more than anyone else just based on the abundance of games and how hectic their schedule has been. So I think that's a factor. And then
they probably suffer it earlier than anyone because they have those 41 games on the schedule already. Like, I don't think anyone else has played more than 38, right?
Yeah, no, it's the London game situation where they're trying to cram all these games in early, and it's been a nightmare for these guys. And they've performed admirably without Gordon Hayward, but kind of an under discussed aspect of that is just how thin you are when a starter goes down in the first 5 minutes of the season. So when Jaylen Brown is now out with a sore Achilles for a little while, like the next guy up is who? It's a rookie,
Ojale, who was a second-round pick this year.
Yes, who has also been out recently. So it's like
it's a great point.
Abdul Nader is getting minutes all of a sudden, and Marcus Morris is getting way more playing time than he should at this point in his career, because I really am not a fan of Marcus Morris.
Well, the problem with him is he doesn't fit what Boston does at all. Like, I don't know who he fits at this stage, really, is kind of an issue with his game, but he particularly does not fit because he just stops the ball constantly. And while he is a good defender of guys that are, he got, one of the reasons that people say he got brought in was because he's another body to throw at LeBron James. He stops guys that size, but he doesn't really do a good job in help defense. He doesn't really have the ability to slide with guys on the perimeter, at least for 4 slides. Maybe he can do 1 or 2, but he can't do like the extended slide out whenever it's necessary. It's just kind of hard to find a fit for him within this Boston scheme more than anything.
Yeah, I don't want to go on a Marcus Morris tangent here, but I'm 100% with you with regards to he just does not fit in with the ball. The ball does not hop when he's on the floor. And you could hear last night Brad Stevens scream side to side, move it. The ball hits Marcus Morris, and he immediately goes into post-up turnaround. And he hit the jumper, but that's not what the Celtics do. That's not how they've played since they hired Brad Stevens. And a trade would not surprise me here. They acquired him primarily because they needed to cut salary, and yes, they needed another body to throw at LeBron. I just don't think that he's the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're better off throwing Shimmy Ojale at LeBron, if that's going to be like, if your option is, okay, on offense, the ball's going to keep moving with Ojale on the floor. I don't think he's going to be an incredibly worse defender on LeBron than what Marcus Morris is, who's by no means like a quote-unquote LeBron stopper, or whatever that phrase means. It's just hard for me to really even comprehend where he fits into a playoff rotation for Boston.
Yeah, I don't see it, and a lot of people who I talk to are a lot higher on Marcus Morris and the that self-creation that he does provide. I just don't like it. I don't like the long twos. I don't like the ball stopping. But
anyway, let's talk about Al Horford. Let's talk about happier things than Marcus Morris. For me, Al Horford's been one of the 10 best players in the entire NBA this year, which is hilarious because Boston sports radio has just been trashing this dude constantly since he got to Boston. But you look at the way he defends, as you mentioned, he's been one of the 5 best defenders in the entire NBA this season. The way he's meshed at an immediate pace with Kyrie Irving in handoff situations and pick and pop situations, he's such a good, option to give him the ball at the top of the key or at the foul line, and he can create with his incredible passing ability and vision. He really is kind of the fulcrum for me of what Boston does. Like, Kyrie has kind of asserted himself over the course of the last, maybe 15 or 17 games or so. But to me, Horford is still the most important piece on that team.
Horford's always been the most important player since he signed here. I'm a big believer that he is the reason, or he is part of the reason, because if you look at the on-off numbers last year, Isaiah was amazing no matter what, but he really just makes life easier for everybody else, especially little ball handlers who are trying to scamper around high screens. He has, since he's come to Boston, I mean, his gravity is respected around the league now. I think he's shooting like 44% from deep. As on the short roll, he's as brilliant as anyone finding the open man, making the right decision, even though his turnover rate is a little higher this year than in years past. I don't know where the Celtics would be without him. He is everything on the defensive end. He is so valuable in matchups against guys like Ben Simmons and Giannis Antetokounmpo and Kristaps Porzingis. If the Celtics had like one wish as an organization, it would probably be that Al Horford was 5 years younger than he is. It's just, he is incredibly important to everything that they do.
I really hope that he gets like the credit he deserves. Like, I don't know if you were voting all NBA this year, would you have him or Joel Embiid higher?
That's a really tough question.
It is. It's so hard.
I mean, it's easy to just fall back on the minutes played and games played, but like when Joel is on the floor, I mean, he's transformative.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, defensively, he just kind of brings it in a different kind of way. Like, he'll step out but still get beat, and then be young and quick enough to recover and just slam the basketball off the backboard with like the most ferocity that you've ever seen. So I would probably still go with. I would probably go with Embiid, honestly. This is probably a blasphemous thing that I'll regret saying, but I'd probably, at this point, go with Embiid. But, I mean, Al Horford he's up there, and I think he should start in the All-Star game.
The craziest thing about, Joel Embiid's defensive impact is that, so the Sixers have like a 103.7 defensive rating. The Celtics have a 100.4 defensive rating. We've talked at length about how Al Horford is the most important defensive piece on this roster. Obviously, he does have, a rating that's basically in line with that. When Joel Embiid is on the floor, the Sixers have a better defensive rating than the Celtics. Like, he's just incredible. Like, he has a 99.6 defensive rating this year. The offense falls apart, obviously, without Joel Embiid on the floor as well. But that's kind of what we're talking about. Joel Embiid gets all of this hype, gets all of this credit, and it's all deserved because of his incredible impact on the floor. But Al Horford is right there in terms of impact, I think. He just does it in maybe more subtle ways than, swatting the shit out of someone, staring at them, talking shit, and then running back on defense or running back on offense and hitting a trailer three.
Yeah, I think with Horford, it's the passing. Like, if I had to look at one part of his game that is just irreplaceable, it's, the way he can pop behind the three-point line, attack a closeout, and then hit the corner man. Like, just never make a mistake in that situation. Like, that's huge. The way he finds cutters from the elbow or on the post, the way you can dump it down low to him and just have him back down a fellow center, and it's a decently efficient shot just because, he's turning left shoulder every time, but he somehow gets the ball in there.
Yeah.
It's not really pretty. There's really nothing like beautiful about his game, but
loud.
It's just, no, definitely not. But it's just like the impact, you feel it when you watch the Celtics play when he's on the floor.
The last thing we're going to talk about with the Celtics is Kyrie Irving. How have you felt the integration of Kyrie Irving has gone this year?
I think, just speaking purely as a Celtics, someone who is happier when the Celtics win in my day-to-day life, watching your favorite team have Kyrie Irving on it is a glorious experience. He just is so remarkable. It's like, I remember, I think it was the year that he was the All-Star MVP, and, I had to do a 5-on-5 thing for ESPN, and it was like, who's going to be the best point guard in basketball 4 years from now or something like that. And I wrote like 500 words about why it was Kyrie Irving, no doubt about it. And, a lot of parts of his game have not developed as I thought they would. He's kind of still been the same player his entire career, which is still a phenomenal, unstoppable offensive weapon. In Boston, I really like how they use him off the ball. They do a little bit more DHOs or I should say a lot more DHOs than they did in Cleveland. But he's understood the value of pace. He's understood, when to drive and kick versus when to slow things down and isolate on a mismatch. He's really looking for teammates. He is not selfish. I wouldn't use that word to describe his play in Boston, which is a pleasant surprise. And, if you're down 5 with 3 minutes to go, and it's just like that might as well be a tie game because Kyrie Irving he's unstoppable. He does what he wants on the floor when he wants.
Let's go on ahead and just move on to the last part of this podcast. I'm fine with, just leaving Kyrie there because he's awesome. And, just fanboying out on Kyrie is an excellent way to end the Celtics segment. Let's talk about really bad teams now, because we can transition from Boston to bad teams because they have an intense care for the Lakers to get somewhere between number 2 and number 5 in this draft. So right now, Atlanta, Boston, Orlando, Memphis, Sacramento, Dallas, Chicago, Phoenix, Charlotte, and Brooklyn/Cleveland, who has that pick. They're all between 10 and 15 wins. They are all between 27 and 23 losses. I think you can make the case that if any of those teams ended up with the worst record in the NBA, there are some that have a lower chance to do it. Charlotte, I would be relatively surprised. But like if Kemba goes down, then all bets are off. Brooklyn is just coherent enough to where I don't think they will end up with the last pick. But they're, one injury away also from just kind of falling off. Like if any of these teams ended up with the worst record in the NBA, I would not be totally shocked. Would you agree with kind of where I'm at on this?
I'm a little high. I definitely agree. If Kemba went down, Charlotte's probably the worst team you've ever seen. I'm a little higher on Brooklyn. I was heading into the season for a few reasons. First of all, like they have suffered the injury, or two injuries that everyone thought would derail their season and haven't, because partly because of how they play, partly because just how versatile they are, and in adding Damari Carroll and Alan Crabb this year's team as opposed to last year's team is just a huge boost.
They're really just coherently built. Like being coherently built in the modern NBA really matters. Like if you're that, you can get by with having what is, I would say, ostensibly probably the worst pure talent without both D'Angelo Russell and Jeremy Lin on the floor in the NBA. Is that going too far?
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, I'll go there.
But it's fine. Like, they play really smart together, and Kenny Atkinson's awesome. They know what to do. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, just like when you are shooting all these threes and playing this fast, it's just like a numbers game. And when you have guys who are competent as opposed to last year, when you really had the worst roster in basketball, it's just a huge difference maker. Plus, Spencer Dinwiddie has been like just a phenomenal bright light, and I don't think anyone saw that coming.
Have you seen my fake Spencer Dinwiddie trade?
No, I'd love to hear it.
It is. So if Golden State feels like they need another guard or another player,
they need more stuff,
obviously. But if they want to make a boost at the trade deadline, Spencer Dinwiddie is on this minimum deal for this year and next year, so he can fit into any team salary cap sheet. If you were Brooklyn, knowing that Spencer Dinwiddie is an unrestricted free agent next summer, would you do Patrick McCaw and Golden State's first this year for Dinwiddie?
I would not do that.
Okay.
I love Dinwiddie's contract. Was it non-guaranteed this year and non-guaranteed next year?
Yep.
Love that contract. Love his size. He's 6'6". He's running this offense. Like,
he's awesome.
I think he's like top 15 in real plus minus. He's great.
He really is.
I'm a big fan. So I don't know if I know Patrick McCaw closed last night with Golden State's Big Four, and I haven't really looked too closely at his numbers. I don't know how well he's playing this year, but I think Spencer Dinwiddie is only 24 years old. He's probably a better player. He's definitely a better player.
Definitely a better player. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
well, it all depends on if you think Brooklyn can keep him. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what it comes down to. Is the player control aspect a terrifying aspect to you?
If I would say, pairing him with D'Angelo Russell as your backcourt, that's pretty good. I mean, after Jeremy Lin leaves, that's a pretty good backcourt. Just like everybody's tall, everybody's long.
Yep.
If D'Angelo Russell wants to defend, that's a good foundational backcourt.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's just you have to convince him to stay. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, he's a free agent in the summer of 2019. You have to convince him we are going to be a very real, viable playoff contender starting in 2020. I don't know if Brooklyn can do that yet.
Yeah, that would be tricky. Although, as someone who lives in Brooklyn, it is a fun place, minus all the snow that's right outside my window right now. But yeah, and then I don't know how many teams out there are willing to pay Spencer Dinwiddie big money. That's another thing.
Right. let's go on ahead and get back on track here. There are now 10 teams that are really hunting for this top pick. Obviously, in this draft, I think many people know this is considered an extremely strong draft where all of these 10 teams are probably going to be pretty happy, at least through the top, 10 or 11 picks. What should the priorities be for these organizations? I think all of them probably have different priorities, but, if you're coming down to it and you are Atlanta, or you are, Dallas, what are you trying to gain out of this season right now?
A lot of losses. I mean, if I'm Atlanta, when I look at that roster, I see probably maybe 2 guys off the top of my head who can be around when they're good again, and Taurean Prince and Dennis Schroeder. And that's dependent on who they like in the draft, and that could change everything. But it's basically just executing, playing hard. They have a smart head coach. They are a nuisance of a team. They went on the road a couple weeks ago and almost beat Oklahoma City when they were one of the hotter teams in basketball.
Yeah.
Without Schroeder. So just having a winning mentality, a competitive mentality, if I was Atlanta, that's basically what I would be trying to get out of it. Coming into the season, I thought that they were probably the worst team in the league, and they've won 10 games of their first 37. So it's going to be dark times. No, it's going to be dark times, but that's okay. They got a ton of draft picks, including their own.
Yeah, and that's fine. But then you look at a team like Chicago, who now has lost 3 in a row, but then went on that win 9 out of 11 games streak, I believe, if I remember it correctly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, if I'm Chicago, this is such a interesting situation because Atlanta doesn't have any blue chip players. Maybe I should have mentioned John Collins before, but he's not he's not Lauri Markkanen. He's not a I love John Collins, but there's obvious flaws in his game where I think Lauri Markkanen, his ceiling in the NBA is just it's a lot higher from what I've seen so far. So when you have blue chip players already on your roster, Chris Dunn play he looks like he belongs after a completely lost rookie season in Minnesota. It's when you have the blue chips already, or a couple blue chips plus Zach LaVine, and we'll see what he can provide. Try to, with your head coach that you've basically selected over Jimmy Butler, try to implement his system and see what happens. And then where it becomes tricky is Mirotic, trading him. He has a $12.5 million team option for next season. What's his market? Can you get even a lottery protected first for him? That'll be really interesting to see. Just the values there. But if I'm Chicago, it's heading into this conversation, I kind of was if you're not going to get a top 5 pick, forget it. But you're telling me that there's how many players are how deep is this draft, would you say? How many players are just,
I'd say there are 6 true difference makers, and then teams from 7 to 11 can be we feel pretty good about what we got. We feel this guy might not be a franchise player, but he's going to be pretty damn close to an all-star level player.
Right. So I'm just looking at, Chicago is 5.5 back of a playoff spot, 6 games back of a playoff spot, I think. That's going to be tricky. But on the other hand, I don't know if self-sabotaging a developmental season with the guys like Markkanen and Dunn, who are playing so well, is the brightest idea when you can also build through free agency over these next few years, because you're a big market team with a clean cap sheet, and not a lot of teams. This is a league now where cap sheet where cap space has value. And they have it. So if you have momentum, just organizational momentum, with young players who are attractive around the league and are showing that they belong, I think there's value there. And I don't know if you can get that if you're, trading the better players on the team and losing a lot of games.
So I'll ask two more questions here. I think that while I have you here, I have to ask you about the Lakers pick. The Lakers have lost 8 games in a row after just a disastrous game last night where they let Terrence Ferguson go wild against them. Who I think Terrence Ferguson had scored like 29 points this entire season before that game, and he dropped 23 against the Lakers. That's probably not a good sign that your organization is in a great spot. Where do you think this Lakers team ends up whenever it comes down to the last lottery spots?
I didn't expect them to be this bad. Like, I don't know about you, but when you are a team that has, I thought the additions of KCP and Brook Lopez would add some
you
much
really
needed.
like KCP.
I do like KCP. But just like adding those veteran pieces, I thought that their defense at the start was exceptional. I thought that those guys had were a big reason why. Yeah, it's not looking good. I mean, if you're the Lakers too, it's like it doesn't matter how bad you are, because if your pick is 2 through 5, then it's goes to the Celtics, and if it's first, it goes to the Philadelphia 76ers. So,
yep.
This has all been surprising. I mean, Brook Lopez's injury, Lonzo Ball's injury, I think that probably initiated the slide here. But for them to look as bad as they did last night, I mean, and then you look at like the inner turmoil that they seem to have with Julius Randle, who is a restricted free agent this summer and is apparently upset about playing time. And
also Julius Randle's agent, Paul George's agent.
Very interesting. Yes. I don't know what the long-term answer here is either for this team. Like, if I was the Lakers, I would really be honestly focused on developing Brandon Ingram, who I think has top 15 talent. I would be worried about developing Lonzo Ball and, the guys on the team the guys on the team who are young and good and will be here for a while, that we can kind of, lay some foundation here. I would not really be so worried about free agency and adding Paul George as if that is the magic elixir that's going to bring us back to title contention.
Yeah, I think my favorite part of last night was like Paul George saying after the game, yeah, I love the big reception. I love the recruitment aspect of it. I was like, what are you doing, Paul? Like, why are you bringing up the recruitment? Next, I just want to ask you about Orlando. Orlando has totally fallen off a cliff. They look like they quit in their last game. I don't even know what to do with this team. They're a mess. Like, I was excited when I saw them early in the year. They were playing up-tempo basketball. They were playing fun. They're a mess.
Yeah, I'm looking now. They're the only team in the NBA in December that is averaging under 1 point per possession, which is really bad. I think the big bummer here, I thought that they were going to be good defensively, like at least average. If you just look at the athleticism they had, I thought Jonathan Isaac, obviously, like, he's on the shelf now, and that's a bummer. I thought he would be able to, provide something on that end this season, and obviously, he's shown in tiny little spurts, like an ability to impact games positively, but, obviously he's hurt right now. But I thought, it's just like guys like Bismack Biyombo, the Bismack Biyombo Maurice Spates front court duo that Frank Vogel was in love with earlier this season, like, capsized the team. And it's good that he's playing Aaron Gordon at the 4. But again, I just go back to Aaron Gordon kind of takes these possessions where he just dribbles around aimlessly and fires up a shot over his shoulder, and that can't happen. Mario Hezonja getting minutes right now. Mario Hezonja is, in my opinion, the worst player in the NBA. So,
well, it's not only that he's not good, but he also has literally zero organizational value to Orlando. Like, they declined his option. What does playing him gain? Every time he's on the floor, he does something that is just it's like humiliating.
It's not even just like missing shots or turning the ball over. It's like legitimately humiliating stuff, like going between the legs on a 4-on-1 fast break and turning it over. Like what are you doing? What is happening here?
Yeah, it's not great. It's not great with Mario Hezonja.
It's all around just a rough ride right now in Orlando. I don't know what else to say about them.
Yeah, they're going to be among the worst 5 teams in the NBA. I don't really have any qualms saying that. And it sucks because they have actual talent. Like, I actually think Vucevic has been decent this year. Aaron Gordon has been really good. Like, they have actual pieces. Jonathan Isaac, as we mentioned. But they were just so mismanaged that it's really hard to come back from. The final question here I have for you. Who is going to end up as the second pick? I think you would pick Atlanta as probably the team that's going to have the worst record, right?
Not necessarily. I mean, I'm looking at this teams right now. Like, it could easily be Sacramento. You know, if they continue to play Scala, BCA, and Willie Cauley-Stein at the same time. Like, that's just, they're doing some things where it's clear that they are not devoted to winning basketball games.
They're the worst defensive team I think I've seen. I mean, like, I'll limit it to the last 5 years, but, like, they might be the worst defensive team I've ever seen in the NBA.
I'm looking at their numbers right now. Yeah, it's not pretty at all. Yeah, and it's like also when you just when they get to the trade deadline, it'll be interesting to see, you know, if they can get off some of those contracts they signed.
Well, like if I'm a contender, I'm looking at Garrett Temple and I'm just like, okay, let's get him out of there. Just not only because he can actually provide value to our team, because I think he can, but also just so he doesn't like end up just fighting people like on the Kings roster for not trying on defense. Yeah,
I actually wrote in my notes the other day, like he does shout at people, like he'll be fronting someone in the post and the pass will just come over the top and it's like an easy finish and he'll just like look around and scream at the top of his lungs. So the Kings, I would say the Kings, if I had to bet money, it's always good to put it on the Kings for futility. Atlanta just plays hard and, you know, they're in games at the end. And so I would say like, yeah, if I had to pick one team, it would be the Kings, which is just a real big bar.
Yeah, the Kings are not very good at basketball. But then again, we expected that. They have like 8 rookie contract players on their roster. I think that might be a record, right?
They're also about to lose their pick. So, like, this is the year where you need a good pick if you're the Kings, or it's just tough. Yeah,
it's just not useful for them to be, like, good right now in any way. Like, they can't compete at the top of the West. They might as well go out and get I don't know. I don't even know who helps them because they drafted a point guard last year. I guess like Michael Porter would really help them just from an offensive standpoint. But Pina, tell the people where they can find your work. Tell them kind of when you write, what your schedule looks like.
So follow me on Twitter, Michael V. Pina. And, you know, every Thursday I have a column that Sam was so nice to shout out in the intro called The Outlet Pass, where I just kind of bounce around the league and write about a bunch of random stuff. So look for that at Vice Sports. And again, follow me on Twitter.
Michael is, like I said, one of the most informative people about the NBA, covering it day to day in the entire league. I would suggest following him. Over on Twitter, he does not have nearly enough followers. He only has like 10,000. Like, he should be at least double or triple that. Please go follow him. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe over on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Spotify. I think we're up on now. Whatever you listen to this on, please go over there and hit that subscribe button. Also subscribe over at The Athletic. Keep me employed over there. That would be great if you would go on ahead and do that. We'll be back at some point, maybe next week, maybe like over the weekend on Sunday or something. We'll talk about a little bit more NBA stuff. But until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.